Doctors, what's the most jaw-dropping lie a patient told you to avoid being embarrassed or in trouble? I once had a patient, a young man in his early 20s, come into the ER at around 2 a.m., looking like he had survived a zombie apocalypse. His clothes were ripped, his hair was sticking out in all directions, and he smelled like a mixture of gym locker and regret. As soon as he sat down, he looked me dead in the eye and said completely serious, "I didn't do anything stupid. I swear. This just happened." I had learned long ago that "this just happened" is never true, but I braced myself anyway. He explained that he had been hiking in the woods nearby and somehow managed to trip over a root, fall down a small ravine, and land in a puddle of mud, which was fine, except that he somehow impaled his hand on a branch that was sticking out. I looked at the wound. It was deep, messy, and actively bleeding. "Okay," I said cautiously, "so this is an accident. Did you have a first aid kit with you?" He shook his head. "No, I tried to bandage it with leaves. It didn't work." Obviously. Then he paused, looking around the room nervously, and whispered, "Also, I might have had a little beer before the hike. Maybe a couple." I raised my eyebrows, but he immediately jumped in to defend himself. "No, that's not why this happened. The branch was invisible. I didn't even see it. Purely an accident." I had seen my fair share of patients lying, but the way he insisted that the branch was actively trying to attack him was a level of narrative creativity I hadn't encountered before. He went on for the next 5 minutes, embellishing his story with increasingly improbable details. A raccoon that allegedly tried to steal his backpack, a squirrel that supposedly bit his ankle, and a sudden gust of wind that launched him into a mud trap. Every single detail was presented with the kind of deadpan intensity that made me question my own sanity. I kept checking the wound, making sure he wasn't bleeding out, all while listening to a story that sounded like a rejected episode of a survival TV show. After cleaning and disinfecting the wound, I asked him gently if there was anything else I should know. He swallowed hard and said, "Well, I may have also been running from campus security because I skipped my dorm curfew." My heart sank. So not only had he lied about the accident being accidental, but he had compounded it with a lie about being somewhere he shouldn't have been. He then started explaining that he didn't want to admit he had been drinking because his parents would find out and his scholarship could be at risk. So he had constructed an elaborate, almost cinematic story about raccoons, squirrels, and rogue branches to cover up a simple fact: he was drunk and reckless. The level of improvisation was astounding. At one point, he even tried to convince me that the branch had magically twisted under his hand in self-defense, which made him bleed. I had to sit back, exhale, and resist the urge to laugh. By now, other nurses had peeked into the room, and I could see them exchanging looks of disbelief. They were clearly wondering if I was about to lecture him or call the cops for some bizarre survival scenario gone wrong. I decided to keep the focus on treatment and just marvel silently at the creativity. I stitched the wound while he narrated every second of the fall in painstaking detail, including how he had tried to stop himself from hitting the mud, but failed because the gravity was unusually strong that night. Halfway through, he realized that I wasn't buying his story completely, and he went into full improvisational mode, adding an imaginary owl that allegedly guided him to safety after the fall. I nodded politely and said, "Sounds like it was a very eventful night." Meanwhile, in my head, I was documenting every impossible detail for future reference, thinking, I might have to show this to a medical student's storytelling class. Once the wound was stitched and wrapped, I asked him again for the honest version, emphasizing that honesty helps doctors treat patients faster. He sighed, leaned back, and admitted the truth: he had been drinking, tripped on the hiking trail, and panicked because he thought he was in deep trouble with both his parents and campus authorities. He had spun a web so intricate, though, that I had to give him a reluctant nod for creativity. Before leaving, he handed me a crumpled piece of paper with a doodle of the evil branch and the raccoon, claiming it was for my future therapy sessions. I smiled, shook my head, and said, "Just promise me no more adventurous hikes while intoxicated." He nodded, still looking proud of his story. I will never forget that night. The level of absurdity, the detail, and the audacity all combined into one jaw-dropping lie. Not only did he avoid embarrassment with his parents, But he also gave every single medical professional in the ER a story we'd be telling each other for years. That patient somehow managed to survive a hangover, a fall, a bleeding wound, and a branch that attacked him all while creating one of the most elaborate lies I've ever heard. To this day, whenever I hear "this just happened" from a patient, I immediately brace myself for a story that's at least 50% fabricated, and sometimes it's 100% pure creative genius. That one night redefined the boundaries of medical lies for me, and I often wonder what he would have done if the branch had actually been real. It was a Tuesday night in the ER, the kind of night where chaos already feels like a permanent resident. I had barely sat down with my first chart when a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, burst through the sliding doors, clutching her stomach and whining in a tone that was equal parts pain and guilt. She was pale, sweating, and her baggy hoodie was streaked with what looked like either coffee or vomit. I didn't dare ask. As soon as she saw me, she gasped and blurted, "I didn't do anything wrong, I promise. This is all random." At this point, I knew I was in for a story, but even I wasn't prepared. She claimed she had been practicing a meditation cleanse she found on TikTok. Apparently, it involved standing on one leg while chanting affirmations and holding a frozen chicken to your stomach for exactly 17 minutes. She said she slipped, fell on the bathroom counter, and somehow ended up with her wrist punctured on the faucet handle. I asked her if she had been drinking or taking anything. She shook her head violently and whispered, "No, nothing illegal. But maybe I took one vitamin. No, 2 vitamins. That's it." Somehow the vitamins had morphed in her story into potions of imbalance that caused her to fall, which she described with a seriousness that could have convinced a jury. Before I could even start cleaning the wound, she leaned in conspiratorially and whispered, "And I might have told my mom I was at the library. She's going to kill me." I nodded, internally noting that lying about your location is apparently a medical emergency in its own right. She handed me a folded piece of notebook paper with a diagram she had drawn, stick figures, arrows showing her fall trajectory, and stars indicating energy vortices that apparently caused her to tumble. I had to sit down on the nearest stool and process it all. As I began examining her wrist, she added with a tremor in her voice that she also might have been on her phone scrolling Instagram during the fall, but it wasn't her fault because the algorithm attacked me. She looked utterly convinced that the social media app itself had contributed to her injury. At that point, my ER roommate, a nurse with 15 years of experience, peeked in and immediately said, "Is this the witchcraft case?" While cleaning the wound, she described a sequence of events that escalated into full-blown absurdity. First, the chicken flew across the room. Then the cat of a neighbor somehow entered the bathroom and yowled, startling her, which in turn made her fall off balance. Then she claimed the faucet had conspired with gravity, making it sound as though inanimate objects had orchestrated a personal vendetta against her. She was entirely deadpan, like this was normal ER fare, which made the absurdity almost believable. Once the wrist was wrapped, she confessed that she had avoided telling her mom she had been skipping classes to do TikTok experiments in the bathroom. That was the original sin. Every other lie was a wild embellishment to cover the embarrassment, but she didn't stop there. She claimed that immediately after the fall, she had tried to do a recovery dance from a YouTube tutorial which involved hopping on one leg and flailing her other arm in circular motions while balancing on a yoga mat she had rolled out on the floor. This dance, she assured me, caused her other wrist to get a minor scrape, which she didn't want anyone to know about. She then leaned back dramatically, hand on her chest, and said, "And you won't believe what happened next." Apparently, the cat had returned this time, bringing a small lizard, which she claimed jumped onto her shoulder mid-recovery dance, resulting in a panic that led to a minor bump on her forehead. I looked at her, trying to determine whether she had lost her mind or I had. She noticed my expression and said seriously, "No, I swear all of this is true, and you can't tell my mom because she'll ground me for the rest of my life." By this point, she was sweating profusely, hyperventilating slightly, and staring at me like she expected me to nod in full agreement. She insisted that if anyone doubted her story, they didn't understand cosmic karma and spiritual energy alignments. I kept my face neutral, cleaned her forehead, and gave her some ibuprofen. She smiled, then whispered, "I need a band-aid for emotional wounds too. Can you prescribe that?" Halfway through, she remembered another detail. She had allegedly tripped over a textbook left in the hallway by a friend, but she refused to name the friend because that would ruin their aura. Her reasoning was flawless in her mind. Implicating someone else would result in negative spiritual consequences. I made a mental note to put spiritual trauma in the chart. As I finished taping the wrist brace, she confessed one more layer. She had told the roommate that she was at the library doing homework, but really she had been binging cooking videos and attempting elaborate pancake sculptures, which she insisted were a highly dangerous culinary activity and directly led to her need for medical attention. She even demonstrated the pancake flip catastrophe with her hands. She stood up ready to leave and thanked me profusely for not exposing her secret experimental lifestyle. I scribbled instructions for her wrist, warned about infection, and sent her on her way. As soon as she left, the staff in the ER collectively stared at each other and burst into laughter, shaking their heads at the level of audacity, imagination, and outright absurdity. That night became legend in our ER. The story of a patient who lied with such elaborate layers, TikTok chicken rituals, cosmic energy, cat's lizards, failed recovery dances, secret culinary experiments, and the omnipresent fear of parental wrath was retold endlessly. Every resident who joined afterward got the same warning: never underestimate a patient's capacity for creativity in lying to avoid embarrassment. To this day, whenever I hear "it just happened," I brace myself for an ER tale that borders on fantasy horror and stand-up comedy all at once. That night reminded me why being a doctor isn't just about medicine. It's about navigating the full spectrum of human absurdity and genius. It was the kind of Friday night in the ER that felt like stepping into the Twilight Zone, except everyone was armed with stethoscopes instead of flashlights. Within the first 15 minutes, we had 3 simultaneous emergencies. A guy who claimed he choked on a pickle while texting his ex. A woman who insisted she had an allergic reaction to bad vibes from fluorescent lights, and a teen who apparently inhaled too many scented candles during a DIY aromatherapy session. At first, it was amusing. By hour 2, it was terrifyingly absurd. The first patient, the pickle guy, swore up and down that he hadn't eaten the pickle voluntarily. It had somehow slipped out of the universe's plan and lodged itself in his throat while he was attempting to break up via text message. He insisted on explaining the physics of textual vibrations and how they interacted with cucumbers, drawing a detailed diagram on a hospital-issued clipboard. He claimed that if we didn't perform the Heimlich properly, the universe would punish him by sending another pickle at double velocity. Next came the woman with the bad vibes allergy. She marched in wearing a hazmat-like mask over her nose and mouth, carrying a full-length scarf as though she were preparing for a chemical warfare drill. She claimed fluorescent lights emitted low-level aura radiation that disrupted her chakra alignment, which in turn caused hive shortness of breath and sporadic sneezing. She refused to sit under any light in the ER, insisting we move her to a corner illuminated only by a single dim nightlight. She also demanded that we sprinkle Himalayan salt around her bed for protection, which honestly, the security guard had to supervise because he wasn't sure if it was a health hazard or just a spiritual hazard. By hour 3, the teen arrived dripping candle wax down their arms, claiming they were experimenting with scent absorption via the lungs. They insisted that inhaling lavender, vanilla, and sandalwood simultaneously was safe and educational, but now their lungs were rejecting the sensory overload and needed immediate attention. Every time we asked what actually happened, they whispered, "It's too embarrassing to say." Eventually, they admitted in hushed tones that they tried to mimic a viral TikTok hack where inhaling multiple candle scents could improve your memory, and now they feared they had permanent olfactory brain damage. Meanwhile, the pickle guy started arguing with the candle teen over whose problem was more existentially catastrophic, creating a heated philosophical debate at the nurse's station. The woman with the fluorescent allergy chimed in, claiming both were ignoring the energy imbalance of the room, and that she alone was sensitive enough to detect the karmic interference. At this point, the ER looked less like a hospital and more like an improvised theater for experimental performance art. As if the universe wasn't done, a fourth patient showed up, a middle-aged man claiming that his headache was caused by quantum guilt vibrations because he had cheated at a board game 5 years ago. According to him, those unresolved moral infractions had manifested physically, and he was now suffering intense cranial pain. He presented a spreadsheet tracking every unethical decision he had ever made since age 7, with columns for guilt intensity, estimated karma points, and projected health consequences. He demanded a CT scan immediately to diagnose the guilt accumulation. By hour 4, the ER staff had resorted to a mix of polite disbelief, whispered eye rolls, and some genuinely deep existential questioning. Every patient insisted that their story, however absurd, was entirely true. Any attempt to apply normal medical logic was met with incredulous glares, spiritual lectures, and in some cases, vague threats about cosmic retaliation. The pickle guy began waving his arms, dramatically reenacting the pickle's trajectory, while the candle teen attempted a deep inhalation ritual in the corner, setting off a faint wax smoke alarm. The fluorescent allergy woman demanded that we dim every light in the ER to protect the balance of the room, and the quantum guilt spreadsheet man insisted that anyone ignoring his moral suffering would also accrue bad karma. By hour 5, the chaos peaked. The pickle guy accidentally elbowed the candle teen while demonstrating the pickle vector, which caused a minor wax spill. The teen shrieked in panic, the fluorescent allergy woman screamed about energy contamination, and the guilt spreadsheet man began yelling, "You're all complicit in the collapse of my moral integrity." It was impossible to tell if anyone was actually in danger, but the sheer volume of bizarre, self-generated crises made it feel like the hospital had been invaded by chaos incarnate. Throughout it all, each patient remained utterly convinced that any conventional explanation, pickle physics, candle smoke, inhalation, fluorescent light emissions, or karma headaches was either insufficient or actively malicious. They were united by one thing: the pure, unadulterated power of lying to avoid embarrassment. The pickle guy would never admit he had been scrolling social media while eating. The candle teen refused to say they had actually been trying to impress friends online. The fluorescent allergy woman hid that she worked the night shift in a brightly lit office. The guilt spreadsheet man never fessed up that the board game cheat had actually happened last weekend. By hour 6, the ER resembled a surrealist painting. Half-dimmed fluorescent lights, spilled candle wax, scattered pickle remnants, papers with scribbled karma calculations, and 4 patients passionately defending their version of reality. I had to call in extra staff just to maintain order, all while documenting in the charts with disclaimers like, "Patient presence with claims of supernatural interference, no physical abnormality observed," which is a sentence I never thought I'd write in my life. When each patient eventually left, convinced that they had successfully avoided parental, social, or personal embarrassment, the ER staff collapsed in the break room, trading stories and laughing until tears ran down our faces. That night became legendary. Every new resident heard the tale of the cosmic pickle catastrophe, the candle inhalation experiment, the fluorescent light karma allergic, and the quantum guilt spreadsheet. The moral of the story: no matter how absurd, humans will invent complex, multi-layered lies to dodge embarrassment. And as a doctor, you are simultaneously the mediator, the psychologist, and the audience of one of the most chaotic, hilariously surreal shows imaginable. That night proved that truth, logic, and science often lose to sheer narrative audacity, and that a hospital is as much a theater of human absurdity as it is a place of medicine. Even now, when I hear a patient preface with, "I know this sounds weird, but," I braced myself for a potential cascade of interlocking lies so elaborate it could fill an entire medical textbook or a Reddit thread dedicated to the chaos of human imagination. One of the most jaw-dropping lies I've ever heard came from a college student complaining of severe stomach pain and nausea. When I asked about her diet, she swore up and down that she had eaten nothing but a salad for the past 3 days. She was pale, sweaty, and clearly in pain. I pressed further, gently asking if she had maybe had something else, anything at all. She adamantly denied it, claiming the salad had been organic, vegan, and prepared by her friend in a sterile environment. Eventually, after some prodding, she sheepishly admitted she had also inhaled an entire bag of chips and half a pizza, because salad alone doesn't fill me up. She didn't want to admit she binge ate because she thought it would make her look bad. I had to explain that honesty helps us treat you faster, and the lie, while elaborate, was somehow more impressive than the actual misstep.